These changes will ensure that all Albertans have ample opportunity to have their say at election time and that Alberta's elections are open, secure, and accessible. We are expanding opportunities for Albertans to be involved in direct democracy by making changes to the threshold needed for successful citizens' initiatives. The signature collection time for citizens' initiatives will be extended from 90 days to 120 days. We are also improving the process by setting the threshold to be 10% of the number of eligible voters who participated in the last general election, as opposed to being either 10 or 20% of total registered voters. Additional amendments will update rules to make it easier for Albertans to hold their elected officials accountable through MLA recall. These changes would extend the recall signature collection time from 60 days to 90 days and lower the signature threshold to be 60% of the total number of electors who voted in the electoral district in the most recent election, as opposed to 40% of the total number of electors in the riding. Recall legislation and citizens' initiatives give Albertans more ways to be directly involved in democracy and to have their say on issues that matter to them.
That's Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. Now, hearing that, especially if you're not from Alberta, you might say, oh, those are some Alberta things, recall, citizens' initiative. That sounds like wonky Reform Party stuff. And indeed it is. Preston Manning talked about giving people democratic tools like recall, which is when you don't like a politician, you can call them back. You don't have to wait till the end of an election. Citizens' initiative, that means when you put a bill or a law forward, again, not from the legislature, but from the people. But I think of those things, they're very important, and that's part of the Alberta spirit. But of course, the constitutional referendum and the lowering of the threshold of it is by far the most important thing, I think, that the Premier said. And you may say, well, this sounds out of the blue. What's this got to do with anything? Well, it has to do with everything, including the re-election of globalist, socialist, environmentalist, anti-oilist Mark Carney. Because as you may know, because we've talked about it before, in Canada, secession, that is leaving Canada, it's not banned, it's not illegal, it's not an act of war as it was in the United States during their Civil War. It is positively legal. In fact, the law prescribes precisely how to do it. And by lowering the threshold to 10% of people who voted in the previous election, as opposed to 20% of every possible voter, Premier Smith has just made it tremendously more accessible for people to trigger a secession vote. Shots fired. Joining us now to talk about this is Keith Wilson, King's Counsel, a lawyer in Alberta. You may know him from the Freedom Convoy, but he's also someone dedicated to Alberta's sovereignty. He joins us now via Skype. Keith, great to see you again. Did I properly understand the import of what Premier Smith did?
Yeah, and what's important to understand for your viewers is that while the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that any province can vote to leave Canada, to become independent, to secede, the triggering event for that is a referendum, and it's the provincial legislatures that control the details of what that referendum looks like. In Alberta, we have the referendum statute that's been on the books for quite some time. And in that statute, the cabinet itself can call for a referendum on separation. But we have this new law called the Citizens Initiative legislation, initially brought in by Jason Kenney when under the UCP, that provided a process for citizens themselves to get together and compel the government of Alberta to hold a referendum on separation. The problem, of course, and you've commented on this in other broadcasts, is it was a very complex piece of legislation and very difficult to meet the threshold. The threshold was 600,000 signatures over the period of 90 days. Well, what the Premier announced yesterday is that legislation's being amended. So the threshold for citizens to force the government to hold a referendum on separation is now lowered from 600,000 voters to 177,000, and there's 120 days to secure those signatures instead of just 90. So it's a big change that will make it Alberta more democratic and give greater say to the citizens.
It's dramatic. I mean, I have said before that I thought that the way Jason Kenney, when he was premier, put these laws on the books is I found it, frankly, I'm not going to say deceptive, but it was a placebo. It was fake. The levels were so high and it was so impossible to do that it would be only the most extreme, like once a century cases that would rise to those levels. To me, it felt like a fake bone thrown to Democrats and populists, because frankly, Jason Kenney, and I've known him for a while, he's never really been a populist. But I think what Danielle Smith has done is she hasn't created this law. She's just adjusted it to turn it from a fake thing that you hang on the wall to point to when someone says, how come you don't have more democracy? Oh, we have the bill. To turn it from a fake thing to a real thing that may actually be used. I think it is absolutely doable to have 177,000 signatures in 120 days. Obviously, you would want to get far more to make sure that there was no disqualification of some, but I think that's absolutely doable. The population of Alberta is approximately 5 million. I don't know the absolute latest. Could you get 1 in 25 or 1 in 30 Albertans to sign a referendum? And by the way, they're not saying they agree with the referendum. They just are allowing it to be held. I think it's possible. And I think it is a very clever way that Danielle Smith is sending a message to Mark Carney that Alberta's got its elbows up.
Absolutely. And I do think it is doable. The previous one, I felt the sentiment was so strong that it was possible. I was not naive about the challenges of getting 600,000 signatures in that short a period of time. This is most definitely doable. And there's even a mechanism, Ezra, for in real time each week, for example, you can submit the signatures you have so they get vetted in real time. So let's say you submit a batch of 50,000 signatures. You can find out the next week that they're going to accept 48,000 of them. So you know you're now 2,000 short, as opposed to submitting it all at the end and they invalidate a certain number of them and you end up being short by 1,000. So there's even that fairness in the process, that transparency that I think is going to ensure that when a group comes forward to make the move to actually circulate the specific petition, that we will get 200,000 plus. So there'll be no doubt that we've met the threshold.
Yeah. And even if, let's say you got 176,000 out of the 177,000, it remains, as you mentioned, within the power of the cabinet to hold a referendum. So if it was effectively there, but through the equivalent of a clerical error or a typo, it didn't quite cross the threshold, the premier could call the referendum nonetheless. But here's the thing, and I've been thinking a lot about this in recent weeks. Most of the media in Alberta is run out of Toronto. And I suppose Rebel News is the same way. I live in Toronto, even though my heart is very Western. I was born in the West. Our chief reporter, Sheila Gunn-Reid, is based in the West. We love the West, but it is a fact we're in Toronto. But that said, I own the company, so it's not like we're run by the Laurentian elites. I regard myself as a bit of a rebel here in Toronto. But most of the media in Alberta are like the radio stations, the newspapers, the TV stations. They are owned and operated out of Toronto. And I do not think, Keith, that the corporate owners, like let's say CTV, and I'm not picking on them, but I'm using them as an example. CTV is owned by Bell. Bell is a massive company of which CTV is a tiny part. It's not even an important part. Do you really think that BCE Enterprises, Bell Canada Enterprises, is going to allow its CTV reporters to reflect the will of the people, or will they turn into a smashing machine to smash anyone who dares to support this? The CBC, it goes without saying, they were just offered a $150 million bribe by Mark Carney to do his bidding. Of course, they're going to smash. the radio stations as well. My point is, whoever pops their head up to do this is going to be subject to the most vicious cancel culture smear machine we have ever seen in this country. If you think what they did to Pierre Poilievre was bad, if you think what they did to Preston Manning and Stockwell Day was bad, all those guys wanted to do is be a part of the system. But imagine if Albertans say, we're done being part of the system, we want to leave, we're taking our 170 billion barrels of oil with us, and we may be the first domino to go. I think we're talking deep state involvement. We all worried about the assassination of Donald Trump, and it came within an inch of it. When you're talking about 170 billion barrels of oil, when you're talking about changing entire country boundaries, there will be nothing that isn't thrown at this. I just fear the greatest battle, the greatest hatchet job, the greatest assassination, the greatest fear campaign ever seen in Canada. I'm not focused on that. I'm not riveted by that. I just have a terrible premonition that if Albertans dare to take their destiny in their own hands, the same way Quebec has now done twice, that those Albertans will be ground into powder. What do you think?
I agree entirely. I was speaking with a litigator, another lawyer yesterday, who's never been involved in fights like this. And as you know, Ezra, I've been on the front line of some very difficult situations, both in Alberta, where I fought the Stelmach government and brought them down, the old PCs, under property rights issues, and then being on the front lines in Ottawa during COVID mandates and Freedom Convoy. So I know I've got the bruises and the scars from those fights, and I know what they take. And what I cautioned this other lawyer about is I said, right now it's being like in a lawsuit where on the other side, it's a self-represented party and we're just mopping the floor, right? As experienced litigators. I said, there's wolf packs and dream teams about to show up on the other side. The Laurentian elite are not going to let this cash cow go. Yeah. They're not going to want us to get out of this relationship where they can milk us and they can have all these huge amounts of money go to them and us be their play toy for their extremist policy implementations. So yeah, we're going to have a fight on our hands. There's going to be dirty tricks played. There's going to be attempts to, they're probably going to put so much pressure on me that I may lose some clients. I'm prepared to do that. If it gets too hot for my clients, I'll certainly understand if they want to get a different lawyer on their litigation files. But not only what you just point out. So we're going to have all of the media, but for a few like yourself, are paid for by the federal Liberals. Right. That's just a fact. Yeah. So they're going to do everything they can to appease their paymaster. They're going to have all the political consulting firms that they deploy in the campaigns developing smear stuff coming after us. They're going to have bot attacks on social media. But there's another factor that's going to even juice this up even more, which is Donald Trump in the United States of America. Clearly Trump has aspirations and sees the value of Alberta and Saskatchewan likely becoming part of the United States. Now, it doesn't matter what my view and other views are on that. That's his view. So we're going to potentially have the State Department and other agencies within the U.S. government advancing positions to help one side or the other. So this is going to be a very wild time in Canadian history, without a doubt.
Let's face it, Canada's economy isn't heading in the right direction. Inflation's eating away your savings, and government debt is out of control. No politician is going to fix that overnight. With Guildhall Wealth, you can hold real physical gold and silver inside your RRSP. It's a time-tested way to protect your retirement and take back control of your wealth. Call 1-877-8-SILVER or visit guildhallwealth.com/rebel to request your free investor kit. And hey, make sure to mention Rebel News.